The irony wasn't lost on me that I discovered my wife's affair while editing photos from someone else's wedding. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was in my home studio, working through the images from the Henderson wedding the previous weekend. As a professional wedding photographer, I'd spent 15 years capturing the happiest moments of other people's lives, documenting love stories and preserving memories that couples would treasure forever. What I didn't expect was to find evidence of my own marriage's destruction, hidden in the background of a stranger's celebration. My name is Alex Carter, and at 41 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd built a successful photography business specializing in high-end weddings, owned a beautiful home in suburban Connecticut, and had been married to my college sweetheart, Rachel, for 18 years. We had 2 teenage children, Emma and Jake, and what I believed was a solid, loving marriage built on mutual respect and shared dreams. I was wrong about that last part. The Henderson wedding had been a lavish affair at a country club in Greenwich, with 300 guests and a budget that exceeded most people's annual salaries. I'd been hired to capture every moment of their special day, from the intimate getting-ready shots to the grand finale of sparklers and champagne toasts. It was the kind of wedding that required multiple photographers and assistants, the kind that paid well enough to fund our family vacation to Europe that summer. As I scrolled through the hundreds of images on my computer screen, adjusting exposure and color balance, I was focused on creating the perfect album for the happy couple. The Henderson wedding had been flawless, beautiful venue, stunning bride, emotional ceremony, and a reception that lasted well into the night. Every shot told part of their love story, and I took pride in my ability to capture not just the posed portraits, but the candid moments that revealed the genuine emotions of the day. That's when I saw her. In the background of a shot I'd taken during the cocktail hour, partially obscured by other guests but unmistakably recognizable, was my wife Rachel. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in a way that was more elegant than her usual look, and she was standing very close to a man I didn't recognize. Too close for casual conversation, too intimate for a chance encounter. My first thought was confusion. Rachel had told me she was spending the weekend at her sister's house in Boston, helping with her nephew's birthday party. She'd left Friday morning with an overnight bag, kissed me goodbye, and promised to call when she arrived. She had called, right on schedule, describing the drive and the party preparations. But here she was at a wedding in Greenwich, Connecticut, 2 hours away from where she was supposed to be. I stared at the image for several minutes, zooming in and adjusting the brightness to get a better look. There was no mistake. It was definitely Rachel. And the man she was with had his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was far too familiar for a stranger. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the rest of the photos, looking for other shots that might include Rachel. I found 3 more images where she appeared in the background, always with the same man, always standing closer than appropriate for casual acquaintances. In one photo, taken during the reception, they were dancing together, her head resting on his shoulder in a pose that spoke of intimacy and comfort. The timestamp on the photos confirmed what I already knew. These images were taken on Saturday evening, at exactly the time Rachel was supposed to be at her nephew's birthday party in Boston. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence of my wife's deception displayed in high resolution on my computer screen. For 15 years, I'd been documenting other people's love stories, capturing the moments when couples promised to be faithful to each other for the rest of their lives. Now I was looking at proof that my own wife had broken those same vows. The betrayal was devastating, but what made it worse was the elaborate nature of her deception. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake or a moment of weakness. Rachel had planned this. She'd created a false story about visiting her sister, packed an overnight bag with clothes I'd never seen, and attended a wedding with another man while I believed she was 2 hours away helping with a children's party. I needed to know more. Over the next several days, I began investigating Rachel's story with the same attention to detail I brought to my photography work. I called her sister in Boston, casually asking about the birthday party and how much help Rachel had been. The conversation was brief but revealing. There had been no birthday party that weekend. Rachel's sister hadn't seen her in months. I checked our credit card statements and found charges I didn't recognize, expensive restaurants, boutique clothing stores, and a hotel in Greenwich on the same weekend as the Henderson wedding. Rachel had been living a double life, and she'd been financing it with our joint accounts. But I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal before I decided how to respond. As a photographer, I understood the power of documentation, the importance of having irrefutable evidence before making accusations. I also understood timing. The difference between a good shot and a great shot often came down to patience and preparation. I began paying closer attention to Rachel's behavior, looking for patterns and inconsistencies in her stories. What I discovered was that her affair had been going on for much longer than just that one weekend. Over the past 6 months, she'd been taking frequent trips to visit friends and family, attending work conferences that didn't exist, and participating in book clubs and fitness classes that were pure fiction. Each lie was carefully constructed and plausible. Rachel worked as a marketing manager for a pharmaceutical company, a job that required occasional travel and client meetings. She'd been using her legitimate business trips as cover for her affair, extending stays and creating false itineraries that gave her time with her lover. The man in the photos was Dr. James Morrison, a cardiologist from Greenwich whom Rachel had met at a medical conference 6 months earlier. I learned this by doing what I did best: careful observation and documentation. I followed Rachel on one of her supposed work trips and watched her meet Dr. Morrison at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. They behaved like a couple who'd been together for months, comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of deep intimacy. Dr. Morrison was everything I wasn't: wealthy, sophisticated, and part of the social elite that Rachel had always admired. He drove a Porsche, lived in a mansion in Greenwich, and moved in circles that included country club memberships and charity galas. He represented the life Rachel had always wanted but had settled for less when she married me. The realization was painful but clarifying. Rachel hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been planning to upgrade her entire life. I was the starter husband, the man who'd helped her through college and the early years of building a career. Dr. Morrison was the prize she'd been working toward, the culmination of her social and financial ambitions. But Rachel had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She'd underestimated the man she was betraying. As a wedding photographer, I'd spent 15 years learning how to capture the truth in a single frame, how to reveal character and emotion through careful composition and timing. I understood the power of visual storytelling, the way a well-crafted image could convey more than 1,000 words. I decided to use those skills to expose Rachel's betrayal in a way that would be both devastating and undeniable. The plan I developed was as carefully composed as any wedding album I'd ever created. It would require patience, precision, and perfect timing, but the result would be a revelation that Rachel would never be able to explain away or minimize. Phase 1 involved gathering comprehensive documentation of Rachel's affair. I hired a private investigator to follow her when I couldn't, and I used my own photography skills to capture evidence of her meetings with Dr. Morrison. I documented their romantic dinners, their weekend getaways, and their intimate moments in public places where they thought they were safe from observation. The photos I captured were professional quality, shot with telephoto lenses that allowed me to maintain distance while getting clear, detailed images. I had pictures of them holding hands, kissing, and behaving like a couple deeply in love. I had images of Rachel wearing expensive jewelry that I hadn't bought her, clothes that weren't in her closet at home, and accessories that spoke of a lifestyle far beyond what my income could provide. But I didn't stop at just documenting the affair. I also investigated the financial aspects of Rachel's deception. I discovered that she'd been using our joint credit cards to fund her relationship with Dr. Morrison, charging expensive dinners, hotel rooms, and shopping trips that she'd hidden from me by paying the bills before I saw the statements. More damaging was the discovery that Rachel had been planning to leave me for months. I found evidence that she'd been consulting with a divorce attorney, researching Connecticut's divorce laws, and calculating how much she could expect to receive in a settlement. She'd been documenting my work schedule, my travel, and my involvement in our children's lives, building a case that would paint me as an absent father and neglectful husband. Rachel wasn't just having an affair. She was preparing to destroy me financially and emotionally while positioning herself for a new life with Dr. Morrison. Phase 2 involved understanding the timeline and scope of Rachel's deception. Through careful investigation, I learned that her affair had begun 8 months earlier at a medical conference in Chicago. What had started as a professional networking event had turned into a romantic weekend that set the pattern for their ongoing relationship. Rachel had been meeting Dr. Morrison at least twice a month, sometimes more frequently when she could create plausible excuses for travel. They'd taken weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons, and Vermont, always when I was working weddings or when the children were staying with friends. The most painful discovery was that Rachel had introduced Dr. Morrison to our children. During a supposed girls' weekend with her college friends, she'd actually taken Emma and Jake to Dr. Morrison's house in Greenwich, presenting him as a family friend and allowing them to swim in his pool and enjoy his luxurious lifestyle. Our children had been unknowing participants in their mother's deception, and she'd been using them to test how they would react to her new relationship. The betrayal wasn't just of our marriage. It was of our entire family. Phase 3 involved planning the revelation that would expose Rachel's affair to everyone who mattered. I couldn't simply confront her privately. She was too skilled at manipulation and deception to be trusted with a quiet conversation. I needed to create a moment that would be undeniable, public, and devastating. The opportunity came in the form of our 18th wedding anniversary. Rachel had been planning a celebration, suggesting we renew our vows in a small ceremony with family and friends. She'd presented it as a romantic gesture, a way to reaffirm our commitment to each other after nearly 2 decades of marriage. What she didn't know was that I understood her real motivation. The vow renewal was meant to be a farewell performance, a final act of deception before she filed for divorce and left me for Dr. Morrison. She wanted to create the appearance of a loving wife who had tried to save her marriage, someone who could claim that despite her best efforts, our relationship had simply grown apart. I agreed to the vow renewal, but I had my own plans for the ceremony. Working with the same attention to detail I brought to my wedding photography, I began planning an event that would expose Rachel's betrayal to our family, friends, and community. I booked the same venue where we'd been married 18 years earlier, hired a photographer to document the event, and invited everyone who mattered to both of us. But I also prepared a special presentation that would be the centerpiece of the evening, a slideshow that Rachel believed would showcase our 18 years of marriage through photographs and memories. She'd even helped me select some of the images, pointing out her favorite moments from our life together. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd been creating a very different kind of slideshow, one that would tell the true story of our marriage's final months. The vow renewal ceremony was held on a beautiful Saturday evening in May, exactly 18 years after our original wedding. The venue was decorated with flowers and candles, creating the romantic atmosphere that Rachel had requested. Our families were there, along with close friends and colleagues who'd been part of our lives for years. Rachel looked beautiful in a new dress that I later learned Dr. Morrison had helped her select. She played the role of the devoted wife perfectly, speaking eloquently about our journey together and the importance of commitment and trust in marriage. During the reception, I stood to give what everyone expected would be a heartfelt speech about our marriage and our future together. Instead, I announced that I had prepared a special slideshow that would tell the story of our relationship through photographs. The lights dimmed, and the large screen behind me came to life. The first images were exactly what the guests expected: photos from our wedding day, early years of marriage, the birth of our children, family vacations, and milestone celebrations. Rachel smiled as she watched, probably thinking about how this performance would help her narrative when she eventually filed for divorce. But then the slideshow took a different turn. The next series of images showed Rachel at the Henderson wedding, dancing with Dr. Morrison and behaving like a woman deeply in love with someone who wasn't her husband. The room fell silent as people tried to process what they were seeing. The following slides documented Rachel's affair in chronological order: romantic dinners, weekend getaways, intimate moments, and expensive gifts that I hadn't provided. Each image was time-stamped and location tagged, creating an undeniable record of her deception. The final section of the slideshow revealed the financial aspects of Rachel's betrayal: credit card statements showing charges for hotels and restaurants during times when she claimed to be visiting family, receipts for expensive clothing and jewelry that weren't in our home, and evidence of her consultations with a divorce attorney. The last slide was a simple message: Rachel has been having an affair with Dr. James Morrison for 8 months. She has been planning to leave our marriage while pretending to work on renewing our vows. This is not the anniversary celebration she expected, but it is the truth she deserves to face. The room was in complete silence. Rachel sat frozen in her chair, her face white with shock and horror, as she realized that her carefully constructed deception had been exposed to everyone who mattered in her life. Our children, who were 16 and 14, looked confused and hurt as they began to understand what they were seeing. Rachel's parents, who had always treated me like a son, stared at their daughter with expressions of disappointment and disbelief. My own family rallied around me, offering support and expressing their shock at Rachel's betrayal. Friends who had known us for years struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the evidence of systematic deception and infidelity. Dr. Morrison, who had been invited to the ceremony as Rachel's colleague, quietly left during the slideshow, abandoning Rachel to face the consequences of their affair alone. Rachel tried to speak, to explain or defend herself, but there was nothing she could say. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She'd been caught in a web of lies so extensive that any attempt at explanation would only make her look more deceptive. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Rachel moved out of our house that night, staying with a friend while she tried to figure out her next steps. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, with the evidence I'd gathered. Rachel had no choice but to accept a settlement that protected my business assets and ensured that I maintained primary custody of our children. Dr. Morrison's life was also affected by the exposure. His wife, who had been unaware of his affair, filed for divorce and made sure that his colleagues and patients learned about his infidelity. His reputation in the medical community was damaged, and his social standing in Greenwich was destroyed. But the most satisfying outcome was the impact on Rachel's carefully constructed image. She'd spent years building a reputation as a devoted wife and mother, a successful professional, and a pillar of our community. The slideshow had destroyed that image in a single evening, revealing her as someone who was willing to deceive everyone she claimed to love in pursuit of her own selfish desires. 6 months after the vow renewal that became a divorce announcement, I sat in my studio, editing photos from another couple's wedding. Emma and Jake were adjusting well to the new reality of their parents' divorce, and they'd chosen to live primarily with me. They'd lost respect for their mother's deception and manipulation, and they appreciated the honesty and stability I provided. My photography business had actually grown stronger after the divorce. Word had spread about how I'd exposed Rachel's affair, and I'd gained a reputation as someone who understood the importance of truth and authenticity. Couples hired me not just for my technical skills, but because they trusted me to capture the genuine emotions of their special day. Rachel had tried to rebuild her relationship with Dr. Morrison, but the public exposure of their affair had made their relationship untenable. He'd moved to another state to escape the scandal, leaving Rachel to face the consequences of her choices alone. She'd lost her marriage, her children's respect, her social standing, and the man she'd sacrificed everything to be with. As I worked on the wedding photos, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned about love, trust, and the power of truth. For 15 years, I'd been documenting other people's promises to love and honor each other. I'd believed in the sanctity of those vows, the importance of commitment, and the possibility of lasting love. Rachel's betrayal had shaken that faith, but it had also taught me something valuable about the difference between appearance and reality. Many of the couples I photographed would face challenges in their marriages, and some would fail to keep the promises they made on their wedding day. But the ones who succeeded would be those who chose honesty over deception, commitment over convenience, and love over personal ambition. The notification sound from my phone interrupted my thoughts. It was a text message from a potential client, a couple who wanted to hire me for their wedding next spring. They'd heard about my work and my reputation for capturing authentic moments, and they wanted to meet to discuss their vision for their special day. I smiled as I responded to their message, agreeing to meet the following week. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new couples to photograph, and new love stories to document. But tonight, I was content to know that I'd used my skills not just to capture beauty, but to reveal truth. The wedding photographer had learned that sometimes the most important picture you take is the one that exposes the lies hidden behind a perfect smile. Rachel had thought she could deceive me indefinitely, but she'd forgotten that I made my living by seeing what others missed, by capturing the moments that revealed character and truth. In the end, her affair had been just another story to document, another moment to capture, another truth to reveal. And like all the weddings I'd photographed over the years, it had ended with the truth being preserved forever, impossible to deny or forget. The camera, as they say, never lies, and neither, I'd learned, should the person behind it.